is everybody today? Good, good. All right, so my name is Steve Goodman. I work as Field CTO at Advania, though anybody that comes to our stand, including maybe even a couple of our existing customers, doesn't know that we've rebranded from a company called Content and Cloud, which was also Content and Code. But we're part of a Nordic group now, I've been for a year actually, called Advania, who are big in Sweden and Iceland and places like that. In fact, I would have been in Iceland next week if not for volcanoes. But in my role at CNC, Field CTO, and I work with our customers, either their enterprise architect teams or their CTO teams and their IT leadership teams, to look at how they can get the most out of the Microsoft Cloud. And we do that in a fairly independent way, really, because we're a business that's focused on the whole of the Microsoft Cloud and partner, particularly, where there's value that's added to Microsoft investment. And the challenge a lot of our customers have is pulling all of these things together so that they can make best use of all the different technologies that they've got. So it's almost a hobby as well as a job in figuring out how all of this plugs together. So I might go home and build an AI-driven robot and then go to work and try and do the same thing in Microsoft 365. So when I'm talking about Copilot today, that's partly because we've been on the Microsoft's preview program for the last 6 months, and one of the core partners in the UK that are dealing with content AI services. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this now, but is there anyone in the room that is buying or has got Microsoft 365 Copilot today? A couple of people. How many of you have deployed it widely to people yet? This week. I know from some of our Copilot customers, it's been quite the journey to actually get started with it. And I'll go through some of those reasons. And from our experiences with it, and wider generative AI in Azure, how you can get going quite quickly. So in the session, what does it offer today? What have we got in the service? There is what Microsoft put as the big vision for what they've got, which is perfectly normal for Microsoft. They're launching a product, and on the day of release, it doesn't always do what it might do in maybe 2 years' time. It could take Teams as a good example of a vision for the future that they've delivered on over a couple of years. And Copilot is much the same, where there's what it can actually do versus some of the magic that might have been shown earlier in the year that it might do in a year's time. So if you buy it, are you going to get everything you want? And the challenge that some of you might have is getting prepared for it, both from a technical perspective, but also anyone that uses it in depth will see it's not something you could just throw over the fence. I mean, no technology should be thrown over the fence for users to just get on with. But in particular, Copilot is one where we need to find and focus our attentions on the people that are going to get the most value out of it. And from that, then you'll find Microsoft have got some good information on finding the right use cases and people to target Copilot with. We've also got where we found that this is the areas that you're going to find your equipment. You can get that if you want. It's all right. And there's also something that is transparent to be a sort of a weird situation in business change and adoption for AI in general, but Copilot in particular, because I'm sure many of you, you don't want to be looking for problem to solve with a particular technology. You don't pick something up and go, right, well, I've got this new shiny thing, right, let's give it to the business. You want the business to need and have a purpose for something. And AI is driving a desire from the business to do something with it. But the business might not have an idea of what that could be in particular. So we need to try and make sure that we approach it the right way. So what does it offer today? So this is Microsoft's slide. This is the only copy and pasted Microsoft slide that you'll get. You'll be pleased to know if Microsoft wants to do a presentation on it for you. I'm sure they will be more than willing. If you have been looking at AI in general, then the technical terms for Copilot is really retrieval augmented generation. So it doesn't store or train against your data and your tenant. It's not used by the wider OpenAI services. It processes things once, but it doesn't keep a set of knowledge about you. That's all stored inside Microsoft 365 in an access via the graph, which is where if you search on the Microsoft 365 portal, it'll come with results. And retrieval augmented generation is where you ask a question and then behind the scenes there's an orchestration engine that goes and finds the information that is relevant to what you're asking about. And then when it's asking the large language models, the OpenAI GPT-4 model that sits behind it to retrieve an answer, part of that is giving it the set of answers that it can use to form what will be the response. And then an orchestration engine that is really the clever bit, where there's a model that's built into there that allows it to control Office. So where it might be quite difficult if you use this saying, right, well, we want to use Bing Enterprise Chat, Copilot in Edge, or we want to use ChatGPT, but they then find it quite difficult to actually work on documents and information. This makes it easy because the great thing about it is really that it understands the context, it understands the content. Microsoft obviously make the Office apps so they can get the data out that's buried in tables and that's buried inside Excel spreadsheets, and then they can extract that information very, very quickly, and then when it's responding, then reform changes to documents, or as it can do, creates presentations at the back of simple stuff like Word documents and so on that you give it, but also answering questions across all of your data. And the all of your data is probably the reason why some of you who've got it haven't rolled it out yet. But that's potentially not a big problem as you start down the road of Copilot. So some example things it can do. So asking it to summarize your emails for the last week. Some of these are range in value as well. For example, when I get back from holiday, that's useful to me to save a couple of hours. But on a daily basis, if you're using Microsoft 365 correctly, then hopefully you won't be getting so many emails because you'll be working across the platform. But if you've tried searching in Teams or try to find a message that might have been in what was Yammer, Viva Engage, email, Teams, all these different places, then that can be quite difficult. So it becomes useful in that context of summarizing all the things that happened, all of your conversations with different people, or what happened on different projects, and bringing things together. So for yourselves, you might find that this is really useful to get up to date with things or understand things that you just haven't got time to get across. If you've, like me, you've got 3 meetings booked at the same time, you've got one that you can choose to attend, and then you want to get some summaries from all of those other meetings where you can ask questions in the context that you want about what happened. So stuff like that is really, really useful in it. But Microsoft are co-piloting everything. So Copilot will be branded very shortly across things that you might already be using today. So Power Virtual Agents being one that's being rebranded as Copilot, but then Copilots that sit outside of Microsoft 365 Copilot, such as Copilot for Power Automate, for Power Apps, Syntex, which is being rebranded as SharePoint Premium. I'm not going to mention any other branding changes because Microsoft changed the name of everything every other week, but the different services in Microsoft 365, there'll be a Copilot for this, Copilot for that. And actually the last one is Microsoft will rebrand Copilot, well, Microsoft 365 Copilot as Copilot for Microsoft 365. So expect to see this terminology across a lot of places. But Copilot, when it's talking about an Office app, or when it's talking about Copilot in Teams for chat, Microsoft 365 chat, that's what you get as part of what the suite, the $30 a month that Microsoft are proposing it at for Copilot in Microsoft 365 includes. Whereas the other pieces that you'll see as Copilots might come free as part of your licensing or might come as part of other solutions that they've got. But fundamentally, they should all connect together, and what a user should see, what an employee in the business should see when you've delivered these services to them from Microsoft is really, it's just embedded in all the apps that they use on a day-to-day basis. And the encouragement is if you start down this journey with Copilots across work in the apps Microsoft provide, that where you've got either systems that you build and deliver internally, then, or third-party systems that you've got integrations for, then you start to use this as an interface. So if you're teaching people to work a particular way in an Office app, then you deliver the same in other applications as well, so that effectively the onboarding experience for using AI in these services, you're replicating across all of those other apps that you've got. So those parts are being built as quick to do apps in something called Copilot Studio. So what can it do? Let's have a look. This is from my actual Microsoft 365 tenant, and I put some sample data in here. So the standard stuff and what you would expect it to do really is being able to help employees ask questions. And this isn't necessarily the most amazing thing, because you could build a chatbot maybe for the last 6 or 7 years, maybe 5 years in Teams and elsewhere in Microsoft 365. The difference is really being able to interrogate that, and we haven't had to build anything either. It's just got access to it. I didn't specifically point it at a place where FAQs are. I've just asked it about things that are inside the tenants itself. And then I can go into the document, and once I'm in it, again, working in the flow of work, the idea behind Copilot is I've opened this up, I've opened up the FAQs, and I don't have time to read, I just want a summary of it, so I ask it for a summary of it. I ask it to pull out the most useful information. It could then be at this point that I might use some of its other examples. So what people often don't have experience with is understanding how to prompt a large language model. Why should they? That's not their job. So we can ask it for help on what we should ask it. We can load examples centrally and give it example prompts in a library, a Copilot lab where people can contribute the best questions, the best ways of working with it. But then it can summarize what we've got very quickly as well. So we can bring back just the key information and then dig into what we want with that document itself. So Copilot, the intention is that you use it in the flow of something that you do. So you're asking a chatbot for an answer, it's opening up the document, and then it's allowing you to interrogate it as you're using it. And then you can then choose to manipulate it. Perhaps you think this is too long actually. I want to just get the key precise information in the FAQ. I'm going to update the FAQ, and I'm going to make sure that it's readable in its current form so people aren't having to summarize it every single time. So you'd ask it to do that, refine the document, make it shorter, give it more professional language, make sure the tone is easy to read. Those kind of questions are the things that we're asking it to do so that we can save ourselves all the time rewriting it and then just do the edits. If you've used things like ChatGPT, then you'll also probably be aware that sometimes it's quite samey content. It's not how you'd write it, even if you give it examples of how you write. So there's always going to be this process where people have to understand that this is saving them some laborious time that doesn't add value. The value is going to be what they then add to it. So if someone estimated, oh, it'll only take me half an hour to rewrite, they start it and actually it takes them all day, then maybe they'll only take the half an hour they thought it would do to rewrite the document in the first place, because they're just going through and changing the sentences around. But it absolutely depends on the person knowing about what they're doing with it. And they have to know their subject to be able to analyze whether it's correct or not. Copilot in Excel, again, if you ask it questions and it gets the answers wrong, then you've got to be able to understand what you're expecting to get out of it in the first place. So if, for example, if I look at this, I've asked it to create me a chart distribution of the count across teams, but if I didn't back reference and double check it was right, it could give me a perfectly bad answer and I might not know it. In a way, a lot of the Copilot stuff is very much like a calculator. So if anyone's got kids or remember when we or still do calculate things by hand, then it is an important skill. That's why it's taught in schools on how to do the thing manually. And then when you get into the world of work, you use a calculator because it saves you time. But if you don't know what the answer should look like, or you don't know how to make the calculation, then you've got a problem, because you don't know whether what you've added up, what the calculation is. If you've forgotten BODMAS or whatever, then you could come up with a completely wrong answer and you wouldn't be any the wiser. And Copilot across all the apps is very, very much like this, where you've got to be somewhat careful, even when it's got access to the right data and you've asked it the right questions. And like Copilot and Excel, it understands the formulas that are sitting behind it. It can still get the answers wrong because it might misunderstand what you're trying to do. So you'll see these statements across all of the answers that people do need to apply some analysis to, like, is this right? Is this what I would have made? Does it look like how I expected it? And you can see this has got a lot of rows in there. So somebody, like, for example, I had a look through back at the original data behind it. See that can come again. No. To scroll through and have a look and go, yeah, this has done this correctly as far as I can see. I can't see anything wrong with it. And then having a look at the formulas, is this what I would have done? It might have taken me 10, 15 minutes to do it. I might have done it a different way because I'm not an Excel expert, but it's given us good output out the back of it.
Sorry, laptop's crashed. Give me a second.
Okay, well that's why the clicky thing wasn't working. So on the next slide, I've got PowerPoint, which just seems very, very ironic in a way. Copilot can't fix your laptop. Windows Copilot can tell you how to fix your laptop. If your IT teams are playing with this stuff, then you might get feedback that is ranging from laughable responses to things to being very impressed with it. But Copilot, for example, in Windows, may not help build your case for why this is a valuable technology. When if you do as Microsoft says, it will help you set up your laptop so it's right for you at the right time of day, and then you try what they told you and it answers the question and then leads you through a set of steps that you can follow. Go to settings, turn the brightness down. It's not massively impressive that comes out the back of it. This is intended to be different, but there will still be occasions when you'll ask these kind of questions of it, and it's at the moment it might be something that it can't do, and that might be because Microsoft don't want it to be able to do that, because when they're building the responses, this orchestration engine in Copilot, interesting background, what it's trying to do is it doesn't come up with the code that's going to change what happens in the app. It comes up with pseudocode or a list of actions that it's going to take. And Microsoft want those to be safe actions. Oh, there we go. And that they want them to be safe actions that aren't going to damage the work, write changes to it that you wouldn't want to review first and accept. So they have to be very, very careful in what they build into it. And that's somewhat understandable because let's say if you asked it to crash your computer, then you wouldn't want it to do that. There we go. I've got buttons again at work. So in that example that I had on the screen before the laptop crashed, then you'll see actually that's wrong. That I didn't ask it that. I said which team submitted expenses the most often? 19. I mean, it's obviously not right because we can see that it's not even the question I asked it. So the answer makes absolutely no sense. But if it could be a bit more nuanced, where actually perhaps there was an unintentional table break or row break in the data that you would notice if you were doing it yourself, or you would notice if you understood the data or you had done these reports before. But if you gave it to somebody that hadn't ever looked at the data, they wouldn't know what they were looking at. So those are the kind of things that we need to work through. So, and that's part of making sure that people get the most out of it, because if they know what the limitations are and they know what they should check, and you assign it to the right people, then they're going to get the most out of it, and they're not going to fall foul of something and go, this caused me a massive problem. So in this example here in PowerPoint, did anyone see the Microsoft demos of what this was supposed to do? There was one, for example, a lady, I wouldn't do this, but she made a birthday party demonstration out of it. Beautiful PowerPoint app. What this is doing is creating PowerPoint slides and then using Microsoft Designer on it. It's using the collection of tools that already exist in the suite, but it does it quite effectively. And use it in an iterative process where you're asking it to do several things bit by bit, such as bring in this document and make me the presentation, add me a summary slide to it, add me a picture, change the picture to something, maybe someone reaching into the air, generate me a picture of something like that, and then it updates the slide accordingly. So it's saving you potentially time. It's also exposing people to things that they wouldn't have known to necessarily find. Perhaps your users don't know that there's a stock image library, for example, in PowerPoint. They don't need to. They can just ask the question of it. So it provides some value there. So I think it's the same one again, because I'm going back and forward on these slides. I'm going to go through a few things now. So what do you need to do to prepare? Now, licenses, absolutely key. Where are your documents and data? So if you haven't went through any sort of a process before this point to make sure that your data in Microsoft 365 is structured the way that you would like it to, if you have, let people just go at it, create teams everywhere, leave them past their sell-by date when people have left orphaned teams around the organisation, oversharing in services like OneDrive, then you've got some way to go to solve things. But there are tools that you can ask your teams to look at. So a trial of SharePoint Advanced Management, part of SharePoint Premium as well now, will give your folk a report within about 10 minutes or so of where all the oversharing is. Do you have a big problem? It's not going to cost you anything to answer that. Compliance issues are one issue, making sure that documents are labelled. So is something that has the words confidential written all the way through it, is that going to be seen as confidential by Copilot? No, not unless it is marked with the right metadata or a sensitivity label, encryption applied to it, and then it will tell the user that this is the case if they have access to it, or stop them from accessing it if it's not something they can open and then reuse. But fundamentally, it's not just about whether it's the right data or the data they should have access to or overshared data. It's also the quality of what's in there as well. So in this example, I'm asking it a question, summarize these emails, that's cybersecurity. And it comes up with an answer for me. And it prompts me to ask it, what's the Microsoft Digital Defence Report? Now it goes and does this from an email, then it goes across my tenant, finds information that's been shared legitimately with me. But when we look at the reference, it's referencing last year's report. That's just a simple example of where if you've got out-of-date marketing information, sales information, stuff that would normally not be a problem, then it might not differentiate between the latest and greatest information and what is really there for archive purposes. So understanding who the data owners are going to be or engaging with them is often a bit of a problem. Most of my customers don't, if I say, do you know your data? Well, of course they don't. Your team are not rifling through people's data, and data owners, in wherever that data is, they're not really that engaged in, most customers, especially if it was data that came across some file shares. Getting them to sort through this is probably not even worth their time. So you've got to have an approach for how you deal with older data, retained data, and also as part of this, it's always going to be a problem. People have got to be able to have a look at the reference to the information and make a decision as to whether this was the right thing that it used. It's reasonably obvious here that it wasn't, but it might not be to somebody else. Now, we can give you the slides afterwards, obviously, for this, but when you start with Copilot, then you want to come up with use cases. These are across generative AI, across content, not specific to Copilot, but Copilot is effectively the commodity way of using these. And we'll find that intersecting them with other technologies like Syntax, part of now SharePoint Premium, where it's got document understanding as well to then generate documents out the back of it, using effectively a pipeline of the AI tools together, generally gives the best value. Or where we're using what would be Copilot plugins to get access to other systems and bring that data in. So for one of our customers, we're using OpenAI on the background, what was cognitive search and has been renamed AI search now in Azure, where it's got access to the systems and it's doing a Copilot style job, but against the customer's own data and systems, ticketing systems, their sign-in systems, HR records, swipe card systems to where somebody was, the plans and jobs, the information about the sites that they're accessing, because a big problem that that customer had was understanding whether somebody had in fact been exposed to something dangerous. And that was a very, very costly thing for that they're outsourcing to a company that did it, but it was laborious and therefore expensive to sort through that data. And whilst, like when I told my wife, she said, I don't want AI making a decision that might affect my health. But actually, somebody going through this is more likely to be more error prone. We're coming back with all of the references and evidence to support the case for or against whether this has been a problem or not. So really, it is the job of the individual with the Copilot plug-in in front of them as they're asking it, as part of what they're doing, to have that the right information very quickly to hand to support what they're going to answer with. So they've got all the evidence back as if somebody had brought that together. The difference between a person doing it and this doing it is that the person that might have asked their contracted company to do this doesn't know whether the person who was sorting through the data was tired and missed something. Whereas this is, I suppose, Terminator, relentless, and we'll keep going through it. And then with the right controls and quality analysis on the way out, it is more likely to generate a correct response. Because with the right controls in place, things like hallucinations or making things up shouldn't be an issue. And we're referencing what we're saying. Now, with Copilot, we have a whole framework that we're using for this. This is how we're doing it with customers at the moment. And one of the starting points is, if you're not going for Copilot today, is what we're calling private ChatGPT. And this is a platform that we use. And as part of this, it allows you to start inside Microsoft 365 with your data and target particular use cases against a subset of your information. So a curated set of useful information that you know is good. And then you can build the case for it. Whereas at the moment, you can't just get a trial for Microsoft 365 Copilot and test it out. And we combine that often with demonstrating and giving people access to this in our environments. But over time, Microsoft will make Copilot available for trials. But we need a starting point often to build the case. We want to discuss with the business what a problem is, what are the issues that they've got, show them what the art of the possible is, and then the business is better informed to then say, well, I've got this problem. From what you've shown me, we believe that we should use this as a test case for what we're going to try and do with AI. Now, what we want to do is make sure that your first steps into giving this to execs in the business, people who would otherwise get a lot of value from it, don't fall flat on their faces and go, this has been a disaster. This has not worked out the way that we hoped, because that's only going to put you back on that journey. So I'm going to finish up now. If you've got any questions, please do let me know. I will be on the stand for most of the day this afternoon, but thank you very much for listening.